Ms. Naba Zehra, and I'm your host for today. We are very happy to have you with us as our guest in the brand new series of Media Matters under Fublis, and I'm honored to be your interviewer today. And before starting the questions and this whole insane conversation which we'll have now, I would like to inform you that this interview, which is going on right now, this will be published on the website of Fublis. So you can sign up to the Fublis website and then you will get the access towards this interview. Okay, so shall we proceed
Yeah.
with the question?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so my very first question for you, Anna, is that what initially inspired you to pursue a career in journalism and content writing?
Well, when I began to think about career, content writing is not something that existed. It was a long time ago. I'm 41. So I decided to be a journalist around eighth grade or first grade high school because I always enjoyed writing. I was good at writing. And I didn't really think of doing anything else. Before that, I thought of studying medicine. But after I started, like I won a writing competition at school, and I thought that was the natural way to go. Obviously, journalism goes way beyond writing well. But at that time, I thought, okay, this is it. So I applied to university, took the test at, the main university where I come from, and I graduated as a journalist. So that's how it is started for me.
Okay, what has been the most difficult type of content you've had to write, and how did you approach that challenge?
Well, for me, the hardest thing I ever did journalistically, because we'll talk about this later, so there are questions about it. I really like to split up. Journalism is one thing, content producing is another. When I worked at the main weekly magazine of the country I was born and raised at, Brazil, there was a massive fire in a nightclub in a southern state where I think almost 300 people died. And although I was a business and economics reporter, that was, of course, an absolute emergency. The whole magazine was involved in, doing a cover story, like a 30-page cover story. And even people from other specialties, had to help. So I had to try to talk to a couple of family members of victims, of young people who died. And it was horrible. It was terrible because I had a job to do. We needed to also give a face to what was going on, to humanize the story, to tell the story of the people who died there. But at the same time, these people just lost very young family members out of the blue in horrible circumstances. And I was calling them and trying to get them to talk. So it was a very hard balance to achieve. They didn't want to talk, but I did my best to bring the story of these people to the article anyway. And everything done in a lot of hurry. Editors put this huge sort of visual graphic thing that didn't need to be that big and took a lot of my text. And so you had, these things are normal, but when it comes to such a delicate subject where you had a lot of work trying to make something without being able to talk to the actual people, so that was pretty difficult. And it was not people who are used to covering cities, and they are more used to doing these. But I strongly believe that a journalist is a journalist. You can be covering architecture, celebrity, it's all journalism. You have to do it correctly, and you should be able to do it correctly. So I managed, but it was difficult.
Well, hats off to you. You've covered such a big incident of your life, I guess. And it was very interesting that you shared this story with us.
Mm-hmm.
Let's come to our next question, Anna.
Mm-hmm.
Much of your writing, you do involves, analysis of a wide range of topics, right? How
Mm-hmm.
do you stay connected with these industry trends in the field that are most changing? You can say such as business or maybe entertainment.
Well, I never covered entertainment in my career, but for example, when it comes to journalism itself, the things I've been covering the most now, because I write for two electronic magazines, one dedicated to architecture and design, and another to medical technology. So I receive newsletters from specialized websites that I find relevant. That is a way. But also, as a journalist, and even if I didn't have to work, if I didn't work at all, I would always still be someone who is into reading the news, knowing what's going on in the world. So even when I'm just, browsing through the news, I might come across things that I might write an article about this. I might suggest this to an editor. So there are some specialized sources that I pay attention to, but
Okay.
I do think that, I'm observing things around me. I might be on the street and see a poster of something that has to do with something I'm gonna write. So it's really paying attention to everything and reading a few specialized outlets.
Okay, so you even find stories near you, right?
What?
I said that somewhere you find stories near you. You can, like, for example, as you said, that near you, if you find something interesting, you started, knowing about that more, right?
Yeah. I mean, for example, just to give a practical example, I went to this interior design, very famous event in Brazil that happens once a year and lasts like 2 months. And I was just looking around. I didn't have any interview scheduled. I was just looking it around to see if something was interesting enough for me to, suggest it to my editor. And I found this brand of pottery connected to a very famous artistic figure in Brazil who has passed away already, but he left this huge cultural space in the Northeast, like a museum, and his family carried out his work with these pottery items, which was one of his passions. And the stuff was really beautiful and had such a rich history behind it. And I suggested it. It became an article, and it happened because I was there, happened to see it, happened to have an eye, of course. Someone could just, not notice how important, how different was that work, how beautiful was
Exactly.
that work. So
Yeah,
it's really paying attention wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you will come across things that can
exactly.
become. And of course, you will be receiving press releases from brands once you start working with these, from, in my case, architecture firms, medical technology firms. You will be reading the news, but you are also out in the street. Even if it's not an event, you might bump into something.
How do you approach hard news versus branded content? And what's the initial essential difference in the process of each of them?
Well, I think that the process and the competences, the knowledge are the same. You are employing the same knowledge and the same, but it's two completely different things. And I am a huge critical of the way that this difference is being handled today, because I've written branded content pieces, for example, for Brazilian outlets where we're actually doing a work for a client that is advertising in the magazine. And I was always very worried, like, this has to look completely different from the actual articles. We need to make it clear for the writer, for our readers, that this is an advertising piece that happens to have a text with information that is correct information, but we're doing this for a client. This is an advertising piece. That is not journalism. And I think this distinction needs to be made very clear. And a very scary experience I've been having more and more often these days is I write to a press agent or even an architect or a designer himself asking for an interview as a journalist for an architecture magazine that does journalistic articles, and people reply, but do I have to pay? And that drives me insane because people have completely lost the notion that, if a journalist is contacting you, that is a journalistic article. If I was someone who charges for doing this, first, the initiative wouldn't start with me. The firm hires agencies or journalists who will produce content for them. But the fact that some people think that, if a journalist approaches them for an article, that means they'll have to pay. I
Yeah.
find that very disturbing, and it's been happening. It's been happening quite frequently.
Okay, let's just move on to our next question with you. With the years of experience in both journalism and corporate communication, how will you be able to keep your writing authentically branded?
Well, I think what I can do and what really matters is to be accurate in what I write, to be very careful with fact checking information and etc. and writing it
Exactly.
well, writing correctly. But I am not a brand. I am going to write according to very different circumstances. I've written about a tragedy in a nightclub. I've written about the terrorist attacks in Vienna because I happen to be there. I can write a branded piece content for a small town hall in Brazil, like I did, write annual reports for, big corporations. And each of these things is completely different. I cannot possibly think that I'm going to come to this work with my brand. That's not how it works. I'm going to come with competence, good writing, and accurate information. But the
Accuracy
style,
is very important, by the
yeah,
way.
that varies a lot. It's not a brand really.
Exactly. Working in different industries, businesses, news, and entertainment, how has this affected how you approach writing content?
Well, if we're talking about content producing specifically, not journalism, I think that all the opportunities I had, as I said, I took it very seriously, and the resources that you use in terms of competences are the same as journalism. So I get to learn about each subject that I write about, even if it's for, producing content, merely producing content. So that it's really, in that sense, it's really not that different. The purpose different. The purposes are the things that are different, and you have to consider different things. But it's really, each piece is a different story and an opportunity for me to learn about something that maybe I didn't know much about before.
Okay, how do you balance your creativity with the need of clarity and factual accuracy when you are writing for a journalistic piece?
Well, that balance will vary a lot depending on what I'm doing. For example, if I'm writing an annual report for a bank or even any company, really, there's not much you can be creative about. You will be creative finding solutions to, for example, how do we organize this? Which chapter is going to talk about what? But for example, when you do a journalistic story or even content creation, if it's a more on the client, then you might have more space to being creative. The piece I wrote
Yeah.
about the attacks in Vienna, I got to be very creative. I was at the opera. I used, I talked about the opera and used some things from the opera in the text that made a lot of sense. That's something, you can't do this in an annual report or in in an advertising branded
Amazing.
content thing. Most of the time, there might be a company that is more related to, I don't know, the arts or direct, consumer products that you might get to use a lot of creativity. But this is a balance. Sometimes you won't be able to use it. It depends on the job, really.
How do you think the digital transformation of media has influenced your content development process, be it in news or in entertainment?
Well, I never covered entertainment, but I don't think it influences much because the essence of the profession, whether it's journalism or content creation, is always the same. What it has changed is that it brings more possibilities in the sense that you have less limitation in terms of space. While in a printed magazine, the space issue is always there. I do have a limit of how much I can write when I do my journalistic articles for the e-magazines, but it's different. And of course, I have to do, for example, research on images. I can, for example, if I find a nice video, we can upload it. So these are things that, the digital world made possible, and that if I was writing it for a printed magazine, that wouldn't be on me, to look for images that, that is the photography job.
Okay. Anna, how do you tailor your writing style to suit both hard news and corporate communications, given their distinct tones and audience?
Yeah, First, I mean, if I'm doing an article for a magazine that already knows me, like a journalistic article, there are certain freedoms I can take. They know me, they wouldn't have given me the job, that they wouldn't have commissioned that job if they didn't like how I write, how I work. So that's easier. But when it comes to corporate communications, whether it's an annual report or a branded content piece, talking to the client very well, talking a lot. I think it's fundamental. You need to know what they want from that piece, the tone that should be used, to understand what the corporate culture is and what they want to convey. It takes a lot of, you need to have these conversations to guide your work, and there are always adjustments. That's normal, you deliver a first draft of 100-page annual reports. Of course, there's going to be lots of adjustments. It's
Yeah.
normal. So it's a back and forth, conversation, and you, with time and experience, of course, you pick up on things that lead you closer to the tone that the client is going to be happy with at the end of the work.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I completely agree with you. Well, my last question for you is that what do you think at this point is the most important skill a content writer can have because of the evolution of both print and digital?
I think that it has never been more important to have a very, very solid knowledge of history, geography, even science, basic science, your own language, and other languages that you speak. You need to really be someone who can distinguish, the truth, for example, from propaganda of all sorts. You need to be able to browse through the news and really connect the dots and be able to get knowledge, because information, we never had more information, but people have never been more confused and have never believed, absurd things as much as they do now. So I think being able to distinguish things, not losing sight of, what we should have left school pretty much, we should have learned certain things that today you see people, oh my God, they didn't go to school. So I think we have to have these competences. We need to have these competences, and
Mm.
also
Yeah.
work on our ability to convey these informations that we need to pass on in the best way possible, depending on your audience. I think this is really important. Each audience is going to ask for a completely different thing. And you
Yeah.
need to exercise this, write according to your audience, but without at the same time patronizing them, or, you have to find that balance. And I think this is a very important competence today.
I completely agree, and I literally appreciate your thoughts. Well, thank you so much for giving this precious time, Anna. It
You're
was
welcome.
amazing. It was a pleasure to take your interview, and I've learned a lot. Literally, your stories, it will inspire many people whosoever will watch this interview.